want you for a second to think back to when you were a child. What did you want to be when you grew up? If you would have asked me at 5, the answer would have been a ballerina. By 6, a zoologist. In the 3rd grade, a lawyer. But I think by the time I reached my teens, I knew I just wanted to solve problems and make a difference. There was no question about it. I knew science was going to be my life. Did I ever imagine that I would be an entrepreneur? Not a chance. It wasn't anything I had ever imagined or anything I had ever dreamed about. But by the time I turned 21, I realized I really wasn't going to be given much of any other choice. If you would have looked at the resume I'd built up over my teens, you would have thought my options were unlimited. I worked in my very first lab at a university when I was just 13 years old. At 15, I set sail through the Northwest Passage aboard Canada's icebreaker as a research assistant. At 16, I developed a novel method of cryopreservation for the treatment of stem cells using completely natural methods. At 17, I spent my summer teaching English in Spain. By the time I was 18, I was recognized as one of Canada's top 20 under 20 for my development of a completely natural method to treat the contamination resulting from the Alberta Oil Sands. When I was 20, I spent a month as a research assistant on a coral reef monitoring project in Cuba. By the time I was 21, I was regarded as one of the best and brightest up-and-comers in my field. It looked like after graduation, I'd go on to realize all of my childhood dreams. But that was the outside looking in. There was something much more sinister lurking beneath the surface. When you're a child, being sick almost seems like an adventure. I would get weeks off of school where I'd get to spend all day in bed watching my favorite Disney movies. But when I look back on my childhood, nothing seems astray. I was a dancer, a gymnast, a competitive snowboarder. I even played on a boys lacrosse team for 6 years. But if you were to look back on the attendance section of my report cards, they would paint an entirely different story. Weeks, nearly entire months at a time, where I'd be holed up on the couch, a normally active child, so exhausted I wouldn't be able to get out of bed. My mom took me to doctor after doctor, but they never had any answers. It was just the flu, or a side effect of having asthma. Despite the debilitating fatigue, they insisted that nothing was truly wrong. I continued to be intermittently sick until partway through my grade 12 year, when I started getting debilitating head pain. The entire world would blur, and my head would throb. In my first year of university, the head pain was diagnosed as occipital neuralgia, a type of headache due to damage or irritation in the occipital nerves. That same year, I had strep throat 8 times. My immune system just wasn't up for the challenge that was university. My second year, I struggled through kidney infections and bronchitis, pneumonia, and sinus infections, and the headaches continued to get worse. By the time 4th year rolled around, I was on disability with school, diagnosed with complex chronic migraine, and spending more time in my bed than I was able to spend out of it. I was sick. I was in pain. The fog of illness started to take over. I felt worthless. I felt defeated. And so at 21 and sick, I started my company. Now, you might think I'm crazy. Who in the world would start a company when you spend upwards of 20 hours a day in bed? This girl. Yeah, it wasn't because I was brave. It was because I simply had no other choice. I was way too sick to continue going to school full-time, and I couldn't even imagine or comprehend the idea of being able to work a full-time job. I simply had no other choice. The thing about chronic illness is just that. It's chronic. What that means is I'm going to be sick my entire life. For me, there isn't any getting better. And that's a hard thing to admit, but it's okay. What it means is I either have to let this dictate my life, or I find a way to live with it. This is only the second time that I've chosen to speak publicly about my illnesses, because I've been so scared of how others would view me and how they would judge me because of my disability. I worried that others would underestimate me, that they would judge me, that they would simply believe that I couldn't do it just because of my disability. But I've decided that I have a responsibility to speak up and to share my story so that others can understand that illness and disability, it isn't a limiting factor, that in fact, it has made me a stronger entrepreneur, innovator, and person. In November, I was diagnosed with 2 rare genetic conditions: Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which is a connective tissue disorder, which means I have faulty collagen and am prone to dislocations in nearly all of my joints. I was also diagnosed with mast cell activation disorder, which makes me allergic to everything, including the medications that are supposed to help me get better. What this means is, as a result of my illnesses, I require a minimum of 14 hours of sleep a day to function. How many of you spend at least 8 hours a day at work? The reality of my illness is I'm rarely able to spend 8 hours awake and out of bed. But I usually get about 4 good productive hours a day. And with really creative time management, hard work, and dedication, I've been able to do more work in these 4 hours than I think most would be able to do in 4 days. So I don't want you to feel bad for me because I'm sick. This isn't supposed to be a sad or an inspirational talk. What I want you to take from it is a second look at your preconceived ideas and notions about what disability and illness means. Because I am sick, because I am disabled, people underestimate my ability. Disability does not limit the ability to innovate, the ability to create impact, the ability to create change. Rather, disability strengthens these abilities. It makes me a better innovator every single day. When I look back to the roots of my childhood dreams, it was never really about becoming a scientist or working in a lab. It was about creating change. And change is something that anybody, every single one of us, can create, regardless of any obstacles we might be facing or have to overcome. Thank you.